So, without further ado, what are we going to do today? This is a rough outline of what we'll cover. We're going to have a think about segmentation. Hopefully that's what you're all expecting. You're not thinking you're here to find out about evaluation or something else. That's another session. We are very much talking about segmentation in the context of arts and culture audiences and the general population. And we're going to think a little bit about a particular segmentation tool, audience spectrum, which is here at the Audience Agency. That's our tool that we use, which I hope some of you may be aware of, some of you may be completely new to, and hopefully wherever you fall on that spectrum, you'll go away with a little bit kind of knowledge, understanding, and next steps. We'll cover how to get started with audience spectrum. If you have no idea how this could apply to you and your work, hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have a bit more of an idea of a very practical next step that you could take. And we'll give you some information about who to contact and how we can help you with those next steps as well. So I hope that's all clear and makes some sense. We'll try and take things, there's a lot to cover, but we'll try not to rattle on too fast, so you can kind of process things as we go. So, who are we? The Audience Agency. Many of you will know us, many of you will not, and that's fine. It's just a little recap of who we are and what we do. Fundamentally, we're all about gathering and sharing data about audiences and about the population so that we can help cultural organisations like yourselves do what you do even better. It's all about sharing, collaborating, making data available in ways that actually help support your decision making, support your strategic work, and also your kind of tactical on the ground work as well. We're a non-profit, we're a charity. We're not in it for the money because there's not a lot of that in the cultural sector, is there? So, we work with hundreds of organisations across the UK and internationally, and have done for a number of years now. Our expertise is in audience development, experience design, evaluation, participation, etc., etc. I think a lot of what we're going to touch on today is going to be particularly thinking about audience development. I'm sure that's kind of what you're interested in as well, but we do have these other areas of expertise as well around participation, around place, co-creation, those kind of areas as well. Please talk to us if that's something you're interested in. Guiding principle behind much of what we do is collaboration. It's about sharing. It's about understanding that we're kind of stronger together if we're all working together and sharing expertise, knowledge, data, all of that. And we have a couple of signature tools that if you've worked with us in previous years or you've had any kind of dealings with us in the past, you may have encountered, heard about. If you haven't, that's fine. They are audience spectrum and audience answers. We'll touch on both of them. You may also have been aware in the past of a tool called Audience Finder, which has been retired and sent off into its glorious retirement, and has now been kind of replaced by Audience Answers as a new tool. So we like the word audiences around here, it would seem, in all of our kind of branding and naming of products. So yeah, that's just a quick introduction and what we do. So I'm going to go back now to the link that I posted in the chat as we opened the doors earlier. It's a link to a Menti. And there's just some questions there about your kind of, the three questions are quite straightforward. It's, do you use any form of segmentation at the moment? Are you familiar with audience spectrum as a segmentation tool? And what's your kind of main big challenge for the year ahead? It might be, I mean, we suggested there, what's your main audience development objective? But it might be that actually you've got, I know your organisation's got a massive capital project underway and you're rebuilding, the building, literally. Or perhaps it's about fundraising, or perhaps whatever it is, whatever's kind of like the big thing that's on your mind at the moment. It'd be really great if you could post that on the Menti for us. Help us kind of think a little bit as we go through this session about what's kind of most appropriate to cover, but also really helpful for us going forwards as we like develop these products and these services, just to know where people are at. So I'm gonna try, hopefully I won't get kicked out of Zoom. I'm gonna try and stop sharing my screen and go and have a look at the Menti, see if it's actually working. If you can't get into the Menti, feel free to just drop your responses into the chat. Absolutely fine. So what have we got coming in? Oh, we've got some great stuff coming out. I'm just going to read out quickly a few of the responses that are coming in. Looks like we've got quite a lot of people saying they don't use any form of segmentation at the moment. That's cool. You're in the right place. That's all good. We've got people, somebody here has said in response to do you use any form of segmentation that they use arbitrary guesses. Nothing wrong with that as a starting point. We've all got to start somewhere, and sometimes your arbitrary guesses can be right. You know, gut feeling has got a lot to go for it sometimes, so no shame in that whatsoever. People here clearly a little bit more developed, saying they use segmentation in Spectrix and in Digital. I'm presuming that's about, you know, creating kind of segmented marketing campaigns, perhaps. We've got somebody using persona development as part of journey mapping. That's great. That's really interesting stuff. Again, we can touch on that a little bit later. Somebody saying they don't, but they use broad segmentation, e.g. dividing by customers by type, like schools and teachers. Yeah, I think that's very valid and very fair. A couple of highlights there. That's great. Thank you for sharing those. We've got most people suggesting that they are familiar with audience spectrum, but not super fluent with it. Seems to be the kind of vibe that I'm getting there. That's absolutely cool. That's great. And audience development objectives for the year ahead. I'm just going to pick out a couple of highlights here. We've got somebody saying access audiences. I'm going to assume that's audiences with access needs and disabilities. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. Customer retention and loyalty. Diversifying audiences is a theme that's coming out a lot. Growing footfall. Increasing brand awareness. That's interesting, with a view to increasing ticket sales in future years. That's interesting. So thinking about us starting out as helping people get more aware of what you're doing and then moving into a kind of sales process. Yeah, so themes there around kind of basically they want more people through the door and perhaps a more diverse audience through the door. Feels like what I'm getting out of that. Great, thank you for sharing those so generously, and please do carry on doing so as we go through. I'm going to try and go back to my PowerPoint now. Seamlessly done. Hey, it actually worked. Bro, is there anything coming out of the chat? Nancy, Chris, please do shout in if there's anything that I'm missing as we're going through. Doesn't look like it at the moment, but no, great. Okay. Oh, come on. There we go. So let's talk a little bit, shall we, about segmentation. It feels like from that little poll there that a number of people are aware of segmentation and are using it to a greater or lesser extent. You know, it's just exactly what we expect, a sort of wide range of knowledge and kind of starting points here. But we've just got this little section here called, what do we mean by segmentation and why bother? What is it and why is it important? So at a really fundamental level, segmentation is the process of, as we put here on this slide, it's about the process of splitting customers or potential customers, really importantly, into different groups. And then those groups are kind of bounded by those people having similar requirements. So it's not about stereotyping people necessarily, and it's not about getting hyper-personalized with things either. It's about looking at broad characteristics that would have an impact on how you would communicate with those groups, or what those groups might need from you. And it's kind of very, very basic top level. And there's lots of ways you could do this. It's interesting, people who perhaps answered in that poll and said they're not segmenting at all at the moment, perhaps you are, but perhaps only informally or subconsciously, because segmentations can be, it can be really kind of very, you know, there's lots of different types, there's lots of different ways you can segment. And you might not be doing it formally, but you might be doing it in your thinking about your audiences, or you're thinking about your program, or you're thinking about how to communicate with people already. So segmentation could be, as we put on here, it could be geographic. It could be thinking about people who live here versus people who live here. People who live within my city and people who live without my city. That's a segmentation, and it's in a very broad sense. It could be demographic. You could be looking at particular age groups. Somebody again in the Mentee mentioned they were looking at schools. The segment, just schools in itself, they're a group of people, young people, specific age group, a specific place. So again, a segmentation could be based on age, it could be based on cultural background, gender, etc., etc., etc. It could be attitudinal. You could be looking at people who are regular arts attenders versus those who are not so regular. Certainly in previous roles I've had, we very much had, when we were thinking about upcoming programme, we were thinking about types of shows that would be great for somebody who's never experienced this kind of work before. This is a great show for someone who's never done contemporary dance. They can come and try some contemporary dance for the first time. So we were sort of segmenting in our head around, attitudes there, first timers, people who might be a bit nervous of this art form or a bit anxious. And a segmentation can be either bespoke to your organisation, or it can be an off-the-peg kind of solution. And we're going to talk about audience spectrum in this session, obviously, which we'd very much say is a kind of off-the-peg segmentation tool, really, but it can be adapted and used and made more bespoke to your organisation. And you don't have to just use one segmentation tool. There could be lots that kind of help you build up that picture of your audience. You don't have to commit yourself to one forever and ever, and that's it. That's how you do things. You can combine tools and do it in ways that work most appropriately for you. So as with all of these things, you want your segmentation to work and to be useful. There's absolutely zero point in kind of getting bogged down in segmenting an audience in a way that doesn't help you and doesn't support you. It needs to be something that is making your life easier and better and more effective than not. So just sort of put on there kind of what makes a good segmentation, but I think the overarching message of what makes a good segmentation is it has to help you be more effective and do what you do better. We've all got limited resource, limited time, limited money, targets to reach. So the point of using any segmentation is really to help you just target those resources as tightly and as effectively as you can. And just do what you're already doing, but do it better, getting that return on investment as good as it possibly can be, making sure you're actually hitting those targets that you've committed to for reaching new audiences, reaching diverse audiences, etc., etc. So that's my kind of, big idea. A good segmentation is one that helps you do what you do better, but with a little bit more detail behind it. That means it needs to be relevant. If you're thinking about a segmentation, there's no point using something that your organisation can't respond to. So an example of that perhaps would be if you were thinking about, oh, right, we're going to segment our audience and our potential audiences based on age. And then actually the reality is that your organisation simply doesn't programme work for a diverse range of ages. You then need to think, well, can we change the programme? Is that realistic? Or should we go back to thinking, well, maybe age is not the right way to segment our audience. Maybe we segment in a different way. So, relevance, can the organisation respond to it? Can you actually make use of this way of segmenting? It needs to be distinguishable. It needs to have actual measurable characteristics. There's no point having a vague, woolly segmentation, because that just makes it really difficult for people to understand what we're talking about and who we're talking about. So again, something that's demographic based. Age is very easy to understand and to get to grips with. Stuff that's a little bit more around behaviour and attitude, potentially where a tool like Audience Spectrum comes in useful, because it helps really clarify what those characteristics are and how we distinguish them. More on that later. Size needs to be worth the effort. Again, going back to age as an example, if you're finding that a really tiny proportion of your audiences or your potential audience are in a particular segment, there's no point even trying to reach them. It's probably not worth the effort. So you need to kind of make that value judgment about whether it's worth your time and energy to try to reach these people in that way. Communication. So do you have the means to reach these people, or do you have the resources available to start engaging with those people? You might find through segmenting your audiences that you've got or your potential audiences, that you've got a really large group of people who, it's like students, which just came to my head there, for example. You might find you've got a huge population of students in your city. Students are really quite difficult to communicate with. They're very mobile, they're very transient. They take a lot of effort and energy to communicate with. Do you have the resources, the time, the capacity to actually kind of go through that process of establishing those communication channels? You might, in which case, great. Go ahead and segment your potential audiences as students and non-students. Crack on, brilliant. You might decide that it's probably not going to be the most effective use of your time. A judgment to make at an individual level. So why does all this matter? Why bother? That's going back to the why bother bit on the slide before. It's all, at the end of the day, it's all about understanding how to meet the different needs of different people. Sounds very obvious, but we know, we know our audiences are diverse. We know our populations are diverse. We're all different individuals. We have different motivations, different lifestyles, different pressures on our lives, different barriers to attendance. So segmentation just helps us understand what those needs are, and then understand if we are able as organisations to meet those needs. So it's really helping you kind of prioritise and organise your efforts. Going back to the point earlier about students, for example, you might decide that actually students are not a priority for you. You want to focus your energy elsewhere. The converse is also true as well. So then it can help you do things like make sure all of your communications are really targeted and really appropriate for your segment. You're not just blanket mailing everyone on your mailing list with the same marketing copy, the same imagery. You've got a way of thinking about how to make it appropriate for different people and different ways people are living and different ways people respond to things. Helps you make sense of the data that's available. There's huge amounts of data out there about population. Again, if you've got that idea of how you define different segments and groups of people, it can help you cut through the noise a little bit and work out where the really important data is that can support you. And it helps you track and evaluate how you're meeting the needs of those different groups. You can kind of set yourself some targets and some goals and some KPIs once you're a bit clearer on your segments. I'm just going to point you there to the document that's linked in the slide set, which we will send you as well as a PDF. It's a really nifty little guide. I used it in my previous job. Shameless plug here, I did, and to write an audience development plan. And it's our guide to effective audience development planning. It's a really good tool to just walk you through the process of this. And it starts from identifying who your target audiences are and segmentation. So it's a really, it's kind of embedded. Segmentation as an approach is embedded into that guide to writing an audience development plan, if you are at that stage of doing that. Another thing that segmentation can really help us do, particularly attitudinal and behavioural segmentations like Audience Spectrum, which we will talk about in a bit, is helping us shift as organisations a little bit in our way we talk about audiences and the way we think about audiences. and the way we start to become a little bit more audience first rather than organisation first. So what we've kind of put on this slide here is that there is this tendency, and I will absolutely hold my hands up to having done this a lot in previous lives, working in venues and working in organisations, to describe audiences by the type of event they come to or the way they engage with, you know, with us as an organisation. So we'd call them a first timer or a regular booker or a repeat booker. And that's a very, you know, it's a shorthand which everyone in the organisation understands, and it's quite easy. Yeah, I know what a panto audience looks like. I can, yes, panto audience, got it. It's perhaps less helpful as a segmentation as we try to reach new people. We try to think about how to engage new people, because actually, if we describe someone as a panto audience, that doesn't tell us anything about the way they live their lives. You know, what might be the thing that encourages them to maybe not just come to the panto once a year, but maybe come to an event in the summer as well. We don't know anything more other than they just come to the panto. So it's really useful for us as an organisation to think about, you know, internally like that. But sometimes something that is a little bit more audience focused and whole person focused, rather than just about the way that that person interacts with us as an organisation, is quite a useful approach to really get into. Just something to think about there. So, we've got moving graphics in this one. Okay. So when you are, again, different organisations can be different levels, different stages of this process. But if you are planning to undertake any form of audience development work, whether you're at a planning stage or an implementation stage or wherever you're at, there are kind of, this is quite a well-known diagram here that we've just adapted a little bit. There are kind of three main approaches to audience development, really, and what you'll probably find yourself doing is a little bit of all of them. You could be thinking about audience development in terms of reaching different audiences. So those people who in the Menti earlier on said they were looking at things like diversifying audiences, or bringing in people with access needs or from different cultural backgrounds. That's the different strand, isn't it? That's the people who are not currently engaging with us, who we'd like to be engaging with us, because we know they're out there and part of our community. You've got the deeper strand, which is looking at who are your really core audiences and are we making the most of them? Are we getting them to spend more money when they do come to us, to come more often, to really kind of engage and perhaps become donors or supporters? And then we've got the new, so it's going out and finding those people who are probably quite warm to your offer, but they're just not coming at the moment. And those are kind of three different approaches, probably going to be doing a bit of all of them. But segmentation can really help there, because it helps you really identify who those groups are, who are the lower engaged segments, who are the core audience segments, and who are the kind of ones who you know are out there in large numbers in the population as well. So this is a kind of little adaptation of quite a popular diagram that you might have seen before, but yeah, hopefully that makes some sense. So I've done a lot of talking there. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass over to Nancy now to just do a little bit of a kind of an intro to a specific segmentation tool, our segmentation tool, Audience Spectrum, and how that kind of works and could be useful for you. So Nancy, over to you.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who haven't spoken to me before, I'm Nancy Shetterline. I'm the head of Wales at the Audience Agency. So most of my role revolves around working with organisations across Wales, helping them with all kinds of things, including audience spectrum segmentation. And today I'm talking a little bit about audience spectrum as a segmentation system. So we've looked at the reasons one might want to segment. Also, I note that Stuart from Planet, thank you, you posted a really interesting article in the chat, which is a bit of a summary overview of some really good examples of different types of segmentation. It also includes audience spectrum. Just to note that I think some of the segmentation systems in the article you shared are about segmenting digital audiences. So that's a really good moment to mention that audience spectrum is specifically looking at in-person audiences over digital audiences. So a large majority of the data set that it's built from and is based on looks at that kind of in-person attendance. So that's our real focus. That's the speciality here. So what is audience spectrum? It's a segmentation system that you can apply to the entirety of the UK population. So we've essentially broken down the UK population into 10 different groups, beautifully illustrated by this rainbow at the bottom here. And you can see they're coded. So the kind of red end of these groups are the more highly engaged groups, and the kind of bluer, colder end are the lower engaged in culture groups. So that's just to say that kind of all walks of life are included in this segmentation system, whether they engage in culture currently or not. We include in this segmentation system attitudes about culture, and each cultural segment is applied at a household level. So just from having kind of postcode data alone, we can ascertain quite a lot about a potential audience member. Yeah, if we could move on to the next slide, please, Megan. Thank you. So there are kind of 3 levels at which you can apply this segmentation system. So we use audience spectrum a lot on a kind of national scale. So those of you who are acquainted with our work at the Audience Agency might know a lot about the kinds of larger cultural trends we write articles about on a regular basis. You might have come along to our tea breaks where we're talking about things like the impact of the cost of living crisis, or attitudes towards culture, how kind of how important audience members think organisations' values are in terms of sustainability and so on. We've got articles on all kinds of things that it's well worth taking a look at. But these all use this audience spectrum system and model at that kind of national level. And we can also look at kind of cultural engagement trends and behaviours, whether which groups spend is going up in, which groups attendance is going up or down in, and how people attend throughout the year. And we can kind of look at how it relates to kind of their local infrastructure and so on. And then, of course, we can drill down at any point on the UK and look at a specific kind of community, a specific locality, or a city, and we can ascertain exactly what the characteristics of that kind of neighbourhood are based on that audience spectrum breakdown. So we can profile a population. We can look at what potential audiences are like. We can get a sense of whether there is, a real readiness to engage with culture. It might be that there aren't any cultural organisations in the area, but there's a large potential in terms of the audience. These are really useful kind of tools to use for feasibility studies and things like that. Or if organisations are looking to relocate, we can really understand what the appetite is in a certain area. We can understand the kind of art forms and the kind of types, contemporary or traditional art forms that might be of interest to people living in a specific area. Or we can understand if, it might be that there are audiences in an area who really aren't engaged, and that might also, we might also learn some clues about that. Is that due to barriers in terms of kind of transport? Is that due to financial barriers? All of these are nice clues to help us really understand a community and their needs and their kind of existing habits, I suppose. And then the third level, which we can kind of apply this audience spectrum segmentation to, is our own audiences, of course. So most of us are here from a cultural organisation. You might be a venue with an audience base. You might be a touring company. Either way, we can, through using a series of kind of tools, which we'll talk about a little bit later, we can analyse our own audiences using audience spectrum. We can ascertain exactly which segment types are most prevalent in our organisation, understand our kind of key groups. I think, speaking for myself, but I'm sure the same is true for kind of Megan and Chris, who are joining me from the Audience Agency. When I look at audiences of organisations I'm working with, there's usually kind of 3 or potentially 4 key groups which really stand out as making up, 85–90% of their audience overall. So this is a really good tool of almost, as well as kind of understanding where you can focus. You can also understand kind of the groups that are kind of less applicable to you as an organisation. So you can stop spreading yourself so thinly. I'm just seeing a note from Rachel, quick one about feasibility studies. Get access to audience spectrum for a short amount of time to do this work. I suppose when I'm talking about feasibility, the organisations I know who we've worked for in that capacity it's more of our kind of bespoke consultancy work. So that's a whole other side of the audience agency, as well as the kind of research tools and products that you can kind of purchase or interact with on our website. We can also kind of deliver bespoke consultancy projects which draw upon that kind of our research team, our kind of engine room of evidence, really. And all of that will often work through audience spectrum, just because it provides such a depth of insight, really, when we're talking about potential audiences. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But also, if you have any questions, do get in touch. And as Megan said, myself and Megan can hang around for a little bit at the end of the session if you've got any specific questions or particular projects that you're looking to do. So yeah, chat with us. Always happy to chat. So there's kind of 3 levels of of applying audience spectrum: at population, looking at communities, and then looking at your own audience data. What we're really trying to do, I suppose, looking at the bigger picture of creating this model is kind of finding that sweet spot, that kind of overlap, where you're combining your own knowledge of your audience once you've kind of done a bit of research and understood the audience spectrum profiles that really apply to you as an organisation, who matters in your audience, and then understanding also those findings at a national level that we might be publishing in articles on our website, or understanding, within your community. I think once you have a really deep understanding of both of those sides, there's sort of this lovely middle ground, which is where your opportunity for growth is, where your opportunity for all of those things that Megan was talking about earlier in terms of an audience development strategy. So you've got your growth, you've got your deepening engagement, and you've got your potentially finding new different audiences. I think that's where you can really begin to action some of those things once you've kind of joined those 2 knowledge bases together. And that's what we're kind of hoping to do, really, whenever we work with clients. So a little bit about how we created Audience Spectrum, what it is, and how it can be used. So Audience Spectrum, it's all based on absolutely real data. So we have UK cultural data sets at our fingertips for Wales, Scotland, and England. You have real data about how people have engaged in culture, based on kind of box office data, based on survey data, and we combine this with census data as well from the 2021 census, other population intel. There's other kind of studies that have taken place, and we also kind of do a number of other kind of research projects that are kind of at a population level. So that's where the things like the cost of living impact. We do kind of longitudinal surveys across the population as well. And all of this kind of intel that we have as an organisation from this research kind of feeds into this audience spectrum model to give a really well-rounded picture. And as I was saying, it's applied at a household level. So each UK household is tagged essentially in our kind of household database with one of those audience spectrum types. So that's 10 groups, which can be further split down into 20. I'll go into this in a minute. And give good indicators of what that potential for that household is in terms of cultural engagement, and also preferences and attitudes and so on. We kind of test this segmentation. It's been around for like I was saying, I think a decade, or slightly longer perhaps. throughout that time, we're constantly kind of monitoring and making sure that it is accurate. We see it play out in data sets that we're using and monitoring, and we want to make sure that it's correct. So we have a team who can make, who are making sure it works and works how organizations need to use it. It's respectful and inclusive, and it's also designed to be really actionable. We don't want to kind of necessarily just create a lot of theoretical information for you. We try and create resources out of it to really use in your day-to-day roles. And many of us at the Audience Agency have, well, I think all of us at the Audience Agency actually have worked in the sector and worked on audience development and in various roles in the sector as well. So we can understand exactly kind of what is needed from a segmentation system too. Attributes that Audience Spectrum is segmenting are kind of behavioural attributes, so things like understanding a person's frequency, the kinds of parts of a programme that people might be interested in, the amount of spend that somebody's likely to spend in your organisation, also the kind of communications that people might be receptive to. Also demography, so age, lifestyle, economics, family circumstances, whether people might have children or not. Also geographical data, so we've got kind of obviously the location from postcode data, but also things like proximity to cultural facilities and organisations, whether we're talking rural or whether we're talking kind of urban audiences. And then I think possibly most importantly, we've also got attitudinal data in there. So motivations, why are people attending arts organisations? Are they actually interested in it, in the event that they're going to, or are they turning up with a mate because, they're actually prioritising their social life, and that happens to be what a lot of their friends are doing. That's something we'll see perhaps quite a lot with experience seekers, one of the spectrum types we'll be looking at. In lifestyle, where are people at? Do people have the time? Are people kind of having to prioritize certain interests over others? It might be that they're very engaged in culture, but actually they're also really engaged in, rock climbing and a load of other things. And you're actually kind of competing to be the leisure activity that they might spend their time on. So just really understanding that level of detail, I think, is really important. And I think it's important to say, so, I think Megan touched on it earlier, we're really trying to avoid not creating stereotypes with these segments. We're really trying to create a kind of well-rounded personality, not personality, a persona probably is the better word, and really incorporating all of this attitudinal data as well. It's really crucial. So the segments themselves, I think probably a lot of you are familiar with these, so sorry if you're hearing it again and again. But for those of you who aren't, there are 10 kind of core segments with Audience Spectrum, color-coded again. So your red segments here are your very highly engaged segments. You've got your metroculturals, your commuter and culture buffs, and your experience seekers. So all people who are very likely to engage in culture, all in their own kind of specific way within those groups. So within each of those three groups, they kind of share different characteristics about how they will engage with culture and how frequently, and the kinds of art forms and the kinds of, contemporary or traditional and so on, and the kinds of spaces they might spend time in. Likewise, for these kind of middle groups here, your dormitory dependables, your trips and treats, and your homes and heritages. These are kind of medium engaged groups. So people, I think a lot of you will probably find they do still make up quite a large portion of your audience base. They might not come as frequently, they might not consider themselves as cultural in terms of their identity. Some of them do engage pretty much as frequently as some of the more engaged types, and that's the only difference there. It's that kind of identity in terms of being a culture vulture or being somebody who kind of attends culture amongst other things. And then you've got these 4 segments in blue at the end: up our street, frontline families, kaleidoscope creativity, and supported communities. And these are groups who are less engaged in culture on the whole. But I think the really important thing to bear in mind here is that it might not be that the interest isn't there. It might be that there are lots of other barriers at play, certainly kind of financial barriers, given the cost of living crisis. I think there are other barriers in terms of, it might be that some of them are living in places where they actually can't access that much in terms of cultural opportunities, or what they can access isn't really of interest to them. It might be a problem with the kind of programming in their area. So lots of things to consider there, and worth kind of looking at all of these in a bit more detail if any of them kind of specifically apply to you. So as I mentioned, there are the kind of 10 core segments, but we have actually broken those segments down in a kind of recent review, actually a couple of years ago now. We wanted to kind of create a greater level of granularity. One of the reasons behind this, I think, is there are some areas in the UK where you'll see an overwhelming number of one particular segment, particularly actually, urban centres. You might see quite a lot of metroculturals, particularly in London, for example, and actually having a bit of a breakdown and being able to see differences within that metrocultural group itself, and further subgroups is much provides a much greater level of kind of understanding of different audience types in your areas, and actually makes it much more worthwhile as a segmentation tool for people in that position. So each segment is split into 2 subsegments, and I will show you those subsegments in a moment. Here we are. So for each group, I won't go through all of these, but I think I'll just pull out of examples. So experience seekers, I think, is a really good one. I think before we kind of created our subsegments, we would talk about this group as, I think generally, probably oversimplifying, but as being the kind of student group of the audience spectrum segments. Actually, when we came to analyse that data a bit further and do some updates and really drill down and look at behaviours and see how they matched the profiles and whether that had played out, that kind of accuracy check, we realised that there were kind of 2 quite distinct groups within that segment. So you do have those students still, and again, with socialising being a really key motivation for that group. But you also have quite socially minded midlife professionals with varied artistic tastes. So while the 2 subsegments, and we've named them E1 and E2, and that pattern continues through all of the segments. So the metrocultural subsegments are M1 and M2, and so on. You find with experience seekers, those 2 subsegments, they're both very kind of socially minded. And they're both probably on the slightly younger end of the scale compared to the other other segments. Saying segments too many times in this. Forgotten how to say the word. But there is a slight difference in their lifestyle stage, and the types of artistic output they might attend might be slightly different. And certainly, I think in terms of looking at the different areas, if you're looking at a local area, if you're doing a population analysis of your catchment, you might find that actually different areas in your locality have very different subsegments. So certainly it's a really useful tool for kind of getting that greater level of insight. So that's a bit about what audience spectrum is. Obviously, if you do have any questions, feel free to fire them out at us in the chat. There we go, Chris is including some useful links as well. Now, in terms of how to use audience spectrum, again, we use audience spectrum with hundreds and hundreds of different clients, so we get to see kind of the key uses of it and how they play out, and the most ways of getting the best kind of benefits from them on a day-to-day basis, really. And I'd say on the whole, we tend to see people using audience spectrum to identify specific audiences for upcoming events and activities, particularly, looking at past parts of their program, seeing kind of which groups engaged with specific elements of it, and then using that as a kind of guide for forecasting future events, for planning campaign work, and for understanding exactly how to reach people, and the kind of tone that could be used. That's definitely a really key use. Apologies. Also then looking at your local area, identifying your catchment and then understanding exactly who lives there. That's a really useful way to kind of identify those opportunities for growth. It might be that you find in, your local, within a 10-minute drive time of your organisation, you've got loads and loads and loads of trips and treats, but currently your program doesn't contain anything for kind of slightly older children. So you might want to really think about reevaluating, the kinds of programming you're doing, or adding a summer holiday activity plan or something, or there's summer workshops in there to trial them out. I think, you don't have to jump in with both feet necessarily, but it'll give you some good ideas of kind of where to start experimenting and where to start, bridging that potential. Then recovering from a cold, as you can probably tell. And certainly kind of tailoring campaigns for different audiences. So looking at the tone you use, looking at the kinds of images. I think, and we're going to talk about some case studies in a moment, but one of the organizations we've worked with has a very kind of tailored and segmented email list based on their kind of top segment types. And they might send out a season launch email to kind of 4 different groups of people. They might choose very different kind of key events to highlight in that email. They might choose different kinds of imagery, different levels of detail. Some groups will want to know absolutely everything. They'll want to know the time that it starts, the time that it finishes, whether there's a pre-event dinner available in the cafe bar. They might want all of that at their fingertips in that email. Other people are more likely to click through to the website and get their information there, and you can just use your broad strokes, and really focus on engaging people and getting those click-throughs in the email. It's really kind of that level of being able to kind of influence and tailor your comm strategies. Also then, in terms of kind of setting goals, I think using audience spectrum to kind of inform and plan strategically is a really useful it's really useful kind of language for that. It's also, I think we don't talk about this enough, but it's also a really useful language for communicating internally, I think. And I think certainly if you're kind of, you're trying to talk about your audience development planning to your director or to your board, it provides a really useful kind of framework for describing what you're talking about, especially if everyone else is on board and understands everything about audience spectrum. So you can kind of set goals. You might want to kind of increase the percentage of commuter land culture buffs in your audience base by 10% within 5 years, because that might be tied into kind of a fundraising campaign. It might be because obviously that group is also very primed for big donations. They might, you might want to tie those things together and kind of set goals based on that basis. And obviously then you can kind of use the tools as well, our analysis tools, to track the success as well that you're having once you're kind of beginning to deliver that strategy and put things into action and see whether it's actually working, and also experiment, see if that works as well, and track whether you're actually reaching the people you're planning to. Also, then again, kind of on that shared language thing, I think collaborating, it's really useful in that sense. So certainly for kind of touring organisations who might be touring to different venues around the country, and want to be talking about their audience development planning, and the objectives that they have, and kind of negotiating that, I suppose, with the marketing teams. I should say I've worked on both sides. I've worked touring marketing and on venue marketing. But I think that communication is so key in building an effective campaign for a production. So being able to be really clear and be speaking from the same book in terms of you know, who you're trying to reach, and understanding exactly how you can do that from company to venue is really useful. Or in, you know, if you're doing consortium work as well, you know, I think there's all kinds of applications. So how do you apply audience spectrum? So there's loads of different ways you can use it. I think I've talked about a few of these already, so I won't go into too much detail, but you can, we've got tools that can help you automatically assign an audience spectrum profile to everyone in your database, so you can really understand at that level, customer level, who's who, and what attributes might apply to that customer beyond spending habits or the booking habits that you have recorded in your own system. You can understand kind of hotspots and cold spots in your local areas, understand your neighbourhood a bit better, understand who your prospects are, see who's underrepresented as well. I think in terms of, you know, inclusivity, I think just making sure that actually you've got something for everyone in your programme, or if you're trying to kind of reach certain people, or trying to make your audience kind of a bit more representative of your local population. You know, I think that's a really good way of applying audience spectrum as well. Now, I think we've got some case studies coming up, just to give you, I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to take up all your time on this, but just to kind of give you a little bit of inspiration. So Nottingham Playhouse are a really good example. They're an organisation we worked with, and they used audience spectrum to support their levelling up strategy. And it essentially led to them being able to build engagement in kind of 4 key areas that were part of the kind of their levelling up focus, areas right on the edge of their catchment, who they hadn't had much engagement from previously. I won't read through everything on this slide. You can have a little read in your own time, and obviously these slides will be shared afterwards as well. Yeah, thanks, Megan. Yeah, we can share all of this information afterwards. Essentially, they ended up creating kind of targeted campaigns, community co-productions in really targeted areas, and really managing to develop those audiences and that engagement, and really understanding the needs as well of those populations as well. Now, our next case study is, I think this is a really interesting one, and probably one that will chime with a few people here. So the National Library of Scotland, they worked with us to develop an audience development strategy. But I think the key thing I've pulled out here is one of their key aims was to kind of drive organisational culture change. So I'm sure many of us will have worked in organisations where I think, you know, the audiences have been firmly the responsibility of marketing teams, and nobody else has much interest. But I'd like to think that that's changing quite a lot in the last few years. But certainly I think audience spectrum, or kind of any kind of segmentation system can really, really help with that if used well. So, for example, National Library of Scotland, they brought their entire kind of scope of different teams together. They held workshops talking about personas, and they managed to kind of promote a really kind of human-centered approach to their audience development that went right across their organisation, and everybody was, you know, looped in and working towards the same goals. Strategically. I think it's a really, really good example. Again, there's more information on that case study on our website. Our final case study is nice Welsh example. So we've got Theatr Brycheiniog, and this is just a really good example of an organisation kind of following through in terms of that tailored campaign work. So they really went in, you know, with both feet in terms of developing a really evidence-led comm strategy. So actually, I've just seen somebody's just been asking a question. David Williams asking a question about segmenting audiences for email campaigns, and that's exactly what this organisation did. I will say they use the tool. We've got audience spectrum licensing, which means tagging within your CRM system. So they use that to be able to kind of create for specific mailing lists within their CRM, and created bespoke season launch comms for each of those kind of. They identified their key segments and really kind of went in with a really targeted approach for each to develop sales. And yeah, and I think it's a really good approach, especially, you know, if you think if you can kind of automate some of this as well. I'm a big fan of automation, and I'm sure many of you are, because it's once you've set it up, a bit of a hassle to set up, but once it's set up there, it kind of runs itself, doesn't it? So if you can set up some really bespoke comms that's, you know, perhaps automated, if you've got post-show emails going out, you know, with a particular ask or a particular objective, whether that's a kind of reattendance in the next 2 months objective, or whether it's give us a donation. You've just had a really great night at our venue, and I'd really like it if you gave us 20 quid. You know, it might, whatever your kind of objective is, you can make sure that you're not over asking of people who don't have the financial means for a donation, or under asking those that do, and you can really make sure you've got a kind of really tailored ask, which you're much likely to get engagement with by doing that tailored approach. Right, I think it might be time for me to pass over to my colleague Chris to talk a little bit about the actual tools that you can make use of for doing some of those things.
Okay, so nice to see all of you guys, some of you by screen, otherwise as well. My name's Chris. I'm the head of product services and customer success here at the Audience Agency. For audio description purposes, I'm a male in my mid-30s with a blue shirt, sat inside the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London. So therefore, apologies if it's a little bit loud, but I'm going to talk quite loudly in order to try and give the people not too far away the gist that I'm talking over the screen. But I hope this is okay to do that as well. So to build on a little bit of what Megan and Nancy was saying then, obviously thinking about using segmentation, obviously one of the main benefits thinking about how you can apply it yourself within your organization is be able to dig deeper and personalize around your own objectives, and of course in more detail around your own audiences as well from that sort of point of view. So basically taking on, for example, what your own experience seekers look like within your organization in relation to your offer and program, in relation to your local catchment area, in relation to, you know, funding or the sort of mission-led objectives that you've got as well. So to really sort of deeper and sort of get that further. This section is going to have a little bit just in terms of showing how to start to access some of that a little bit more detail. One of the first points of call is obviously to have a look at the segments in a little bit more detail. One of us posted a link on the chat, so the pen portrait, but we've also got some of the motivational guides available as well. These are 3-4 page little guides. Obviously the images show it there, that sort of have sort of the core sort of details around them as well. So a good sort of way to start to look to try to help you sort of get started with those as well. These are of course freely available and sort of obviously available for all organizations as well. They were thinking a little bit more, getting a little bit more practical on it. Obviously that's also just a quick look at one of the motivational guides looking at, course you can link into some of those sections if you want to zoom, for example, in some of the places of attitudes or some of the details around the sub-segment breakdown as well. Thinking then a little bit around what we can also offer to get a little bit more deeper as well. Building on to that, some of you will have seen this already, I know, and I can see that Amy's there, Megan's done a quick snapshot of this in relation to Manchester, but you can have a look at what the population looks like in audience spectrum in your local area. As mentioned earlier on, obviously audience spectrum both profiles the population as well as your own audiences, so you can see what the breakdown looks like within using this map within a particular postal district as well. So this is looking at the population, so we can see here in M30, which is in Greater Manchester and Salford. Frontline families and up-house streets are actually the most dominant profiles as well, but there's also quite a few trips and treats sort of rolling around that from that sort of point of view. But definitely do have a look at the mapping tool if you haven't already. Of course, you can also zoom into particular segments as well, just that this image is sort of showing you as well. So this is to zoom down on frontline families as well. For those of you that are in audience answers and contributing it to already, or indeed would like to, if you just click in the set to data section, that's where you can find that one as well. And then I think a little bit more just around your own audiences. Obviously, a lot of that was all just thinking about the population, thinking about your own audiences. I can see within the room today, there's a mixture of both venues and other types of organisation that people have also got as well within the room. Thinking about accessing audience profiling on your audiences. This was a question that was mentioned a little bit earlier on as well. You can do this in several ways. If you just, for example, have audience data in a postcode-based format, so if you've got postcode details of audiences, we can do that for you in reporting and mapping and profiling. All that we need to do this is full postcodes as well, so we can do profiling and obviously thinking about that comparison as well. So to be able to benchmark that is always something that we'd always sort of recommend thinking about as well. Obviously, we can provide more details on that, and the prices start from a couple of £100. So that's sort of one way look to get started as well. Thinking again just around other sort of ways to access a little bit more widely on that population. Sorry, Megan, if you could jump to the next slide from that sort of point of view. We've also got our population profile reports. Excuse me, these were previously known as area profile reports. From that sort of point of view, but we just changed the name. We updated the census data and some other metrics as well. So if you're looking for a little bit of an in-detailed snapshot on your particular local catchment area, then you can have a little bit of a look at this one as well through one of these reports. Within the reports, there's different population metrics, both from the 2021 census as well as audience spectrum. So it's not just audience spectrum as such, but alongside using the map that we just showed a couple of slides previous, hopefully that's a good way to have a little bit of a look at that one as well. So that's just one ways to be able to find that as well. Obviously, just a note for the message in there, we will post some of the links back in there as well. Thinking again, particularly for those of you that are ticketed venues and already contributing ticketing data to audience answers, or the previously were doing so under the Audience Finder data tool, so the predecessor to audience answers as such. You can also analyze your data within your dashboard. You can do some of this at an audience spectrum level completely free of charge from that sort of point of view. But you can also do this in a brand new function that we've just released within literally a couple of weeks ago from that sort of point of view, to basically do this at an event level. So if you are a ticketed venue, you can do this basically grouping events, grouping deductions, and basically have a little bit of a more in detailed way to be able to do that as well. That quick moving image of there, just showing a little bit around it. But negative, I'll be able to share my screen now. I'm going to do that literally just for a second to be able to do it. That sort of point of view. Sorry about this, just while I change that back. That's the point of view. All right, take two on the screen. That's the point of view. Sorry, all the fun. I had my laptop stolen not too long ago. You know, you got to reset up everything else and the all these conditions. That's the point of view. Sorry about this. If not, I might just skip this section, or I might come back to it from some point of view.
Jump in whilst Christopher, to say, if you're thinking, gosh, where on earth do I find these things? All this looks great. We will circulate some links afterwards. Nancy's put some in the chat already. If you're an existing Audience Answers user, you'll be able to find a lot of this already in there. If you're new, we can also set up a conversation, talk you through where everything is as well. So yeah, don't worry about any of that. It'll come.
Okay, sorry about that. There you go. All the fun of screen sharing. The good news is hopefully you can see that now. Also, I'd just like to thank Jenny and Emily from the point you see. I think Jenny's here. Give us a wave if you want to turn on your camera from that sort of point of view. I'm just very kindly using their dashboard right here now just to demonstrate a little bit more around that. As you can see, this is just a little bit of an overview to what Audience Answers looks like as well. You can find some of those resources that were linked in the chat by Nancy and Megan through sector data section here. But thinking around analysing your own audiences through Audience Spectrum, you can do it completely free of charge through your overview dashboard. You can see a little bit of an overview of audience spectrum just down here. It's going to take a second to load, but just pretend it looks like that while I do that as well. Similarly, there we go, from that sort of point of view. Of course, at the top during the menu tab, you can filter that by date range to have a little bit of a look at that one as well. One element I'm just going to very quickly look at, though, just like I mentioned, the event filtering as well. Within the dashboard, this is a small playful feature, but it's sort of an ideal accomplishment alongside areas such as audience spectrum licensing and areas such as that one. You can have a quick look into this and you can see your full breakdown of your audiences by audience spectrum. This includes by bookers, by tickets, income and yield as well, also in relation to your catchment area as well. So quite an in-detailed function to have a little bit of a look at, and probably one of the most useful things you can do at this. Of course, you can look to do this obviously at a date range level, so you can filter this background as well, but also at a production level as well. So what I made earlier from that sort of point of view, I did a quick bit of grouping features of the data as well. So what we can actually do, you can create your own custom groups. So I'm just going to take this as an example of comparing Christmas shows. So let's say we wanted to have a quick look at what the data looked like in between the two Christmas periods. So Christmas was gone and also Christmas 2020. You can do that and then you can compare the data for those specific productions. This is just reading the data at a production and event level from the Point Berry Theatre's Spectric system, but obviously works the same from that sort of point of view. You can see how that data compares as well from that sort of point of view around that one. I won't linger on this one too much, as they're all not to show much of an individual organisation's data, but hopefully a little bit of an overview of also some of the sort of things that you can do. So obviously thinking about your objectives and other areas that you might want to look at as well. Jumping back in a little bit more just in terms of last sort of elements as well. Obviously one of the last moments, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, to be honest, as well, is just obviously thinking about the last option and one of the detailed options that are linked quite heavily into those case studies that we mentioned as well, but also what we refer to as an audience spectrum license. So what an audience spectrum license does, it allows you to basically profile all of your individual customer records within your ticketing or CRM system with a first and second tier audience spectrum type. So we've got direct feeds with organizations that are connected to audience answers, and we actually have an automated integration with Spectrics users as well that actually updates this automatically. So sort of one of the main reasons to be able to do it, it allows you to implement audience spectrum across your campaign, both how you evaluate productions and also into other features of your ticketing system, so such as mailing. Nancy didn't include this case study there, but one of the other case studies you can see online or some of the organisations that use this quite heavily in mailing. Aberdeen Performing Arts are another one, which are on there as well. And also how some organisations link this through to other types of dashboards and evaluation as well. Hall for Cornwall, which is another case study, actually use the data, they pull it through their Spectric system, so the license tags the data, and then they pull that back through out of their ticketing system into a Power BI dashboard, and they use it as another way to evaluate their audiences at a production level. So just another sort of few examples of what how other organisations are using it. So what I will do now, we're just going to pass on a couple more sections, don't worry, for the rest of the 4 hours today. And as I mentioned, some of those links are in the chat, will follow up afterwards, but obviously do feel free to ask us any other questions that you've sort of got on that one as well. So if I can hand back to you over there, Megan. And again, my apologies if it was a slight bit loud here from that sort of point of view, but I think by talking loudly, it got the point across to a few people in our staff.
It was absolutely fine, thanks. Do you want to give the screen sharing back to me if you need to dash off? Yeah, brill, lovely, thank you. Great. Well, you're still with us. Wonderful. Thank you. We're throwing a lot of information at you here. Very much appreciate that. So great to still have you around. I'm just going to really touch on really briefly for the last sort of few minutes of the session is just a little kind of practical exercise. If we were doing this event in person in a room, at this point, we'd break out, we'd all go have a cup of tea, and then we'd come back and we'd get out some big sheets of paper and some felt tip pens, and we'd start doing this exercise for real around a table. A little bit tricky to do that online. But I think it's something that's really worth just telling you about, because actually I've done this exercise several times over in various stages in my career. I've done it in this job, I've done it in previous jobs, and every time I do it, it helps me understand these personas a little bit more. And I think if you are in a position in your organization of really like feeling quite inspired to start using segmentation, or to start thinking about who your key segments, whether they be audience spectrum or any other type, might be for you, half the battle sometimes, or more than half the battle, is sometimes just getting the rest of the team on board and getting your colleagues on board and getting everyone across the organization understanding what on earth we're talking about here. Often these segments have quite jargony kind of names, or they can feel quite jargony, and it doesn't mean a huge amount to somebody who is perhaps not as fluent with them as you are. And what we're always kind of really keen to emphasize to people such as yourselves and organizations in general is that, and hopefully you've picked this up from the case studies as well, segmentation works really, really, really well if everyone is on board with it. And it's not just the marketing department's thing. It's something that the programming team understand. It's something that people who work in fundraising have got a bit of an eye on. It's perhaps even something that if you're venue-based, that your front of house operations and bar and catering all kind of understand, because the experience the customer has is obviously holistic, isn't it? When they come into the building, they interact with the bar, they interact with the cloakroom, they interact with the program. Obviously, it's not just about the email that they receive promoting the show, it's the whole experience. And if we're going to do this really, really well, we need to make sure that our whole offer is kind of focused around a segment. So to that end, this whole kind of persona workshop exercise can be a really, really good way just to get all of those people who don't often think in this way, perhaps, or this might be a first time for them thinking about this, just get them kind of on board with it. I should say we can absolutely come and facilitate this for you if you'd like us to come in and do a couple of hours session with you. And what we would do is we would look at what perhaps we'd agree ahead of time, kind of what your key segments might be. You know, what are the ones that are really dominant in your current audiences, but perhaps also what are the ones that are segments you'd like to start working with or start to deepen that engagement with. It goes back to that new, deeper kind of diagram that we looked at earlier as well. So if you'd like us to come in and do that, give us a shout. We're very happy to come and do that. We can do it for a group of, however many really. And they are good fun. It's always one of those ones people roll their eyes a little bit at the prospect, but then they get into it. I've yet to find a group that haven't got really into doing this, surprisingly so. But you can absolutely facilitate it yourself with your own team, or even just a couple of you around the table for an hour or so. And what we do really is we take one of these segments and we've started to make them into a real person that we can identify with. So they're not just an experience seeker, they become Dave or whoever. And we understand them as a full person. And of course, what that then helps us do is think about, okay, I understand who Dave is as a person, but now I can really think about what he's looking for in his night out at my cinema, and what he's looking for in his kind of whole experience, and also how I can reach him and how I can communicate with him. So what I'd suggest works really, really well is literally to get out a big piece of paper, give people some felt tip pens and start drawing a person and start really thinking about this person and bringing them to life. And I do know of organizations that have done this exercise and they've literally made beer posters and stuck them up on their office walls so that they can kind of refer back to them and think, yes, when we're talking about an experience seeker, that's Dave, there he is on the wall, and it's very, very kind of clear visually as well for people to do. But there's some key questions that you can kind of prompt people to look at in this that help you answer these kind of things that I put on screen here. Who is this person? What role does arts and culture play in their lives? What's their lifestyle and what kind of offer could we, how could we adapt our offer to reach them? And where do you find the answers to all of this? Well, it's going back to those motivation guides and those profiles that we talked about a little bit earlier, where we've really kind of used all of that knowledge that we've got about lifestyles and demographics and engagement, et cetera, to build up these kind of holistic pictures of people. So we're not asking you to make up the answers to these. They're there in the profiles, but it's just about focusing in and creating that kind of, very meaningful persona to you. And it's about making it feel local as well. I mean, if you're asking the question, if I just move on one screen, here are some more prompt questions. Again, we'll circulate these, but these are the sort of prompt questions that we'd use in setting up an exercise like this. And often it works really well if you're doing it as an individual organisation level, because you get people talking about a very specific location that means something to them. So when we say, where do they live? People go, I'm going to use my example here because I'm in Salford in Greater Manchester. Where do they live? They live in Withington. You can get really specific about the place where somebody lives, and the group of your colleagues will understand, go, oh yes, I can picture what Dave, who lives in a semi-detached house in Withington, is like. I can picture him and his lifestyle. What do they do for a living? If you're in an area where you've got, a major local employee, you can say, oh, he works for HSBC, whose bank headquarters are in town. You can make it really localized and focused and really meaningful to you, your organization, and your kind of environment that you're working in. So it's a bit of fun, but it does have some really, really kind of useful outcomes to just get people thinking about audiences and potential audiences, not just in terms of how they sort of engage with you, but what their lives look like, what's going on in their lives, what are the factors that may or may not be barriers for them as well. I'd love to set up and do it here in this group now, but it's really difficult online. We've tried it; it doesn't work brilliantly. It's a much better exercise to do in your own organisation. As I say, we can come and facilitate those as well. But at the end of the day, it's just, I really can't recommend it enough. It's a really, really worthwhile little exercise to run through. I'm just going to leave you with that as a little thing to ponder on, if you'd like to do that. So, and finally, Chris, are you still around, or do you want me to talk through this one? I know you had to dash off.
I think Chris has dashed off.
Has he gone?
I'm happy to take over if you want, though.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, it's absolutely fine. I know he said he might be around still, but I think he had another meeting, so we're all good. So yeah, just to say, audience spectrum, we've talked a lot about it in this session. It's not a static thing. It's always evolving as we do more research, as we test and reiterate and test, we develop it. We're always looking at ways we can make it more kind of bespoke and more relevant to organisations. We're looking at ways we can incorporate new technologies like whisper it quietly, artificial intelligence and things like that into it. We're working with the University of Leicester to look at kind of some machine learning that could apply to some of this segmentation. So it's absolutely not a fixed and static segmentation. All the research, the wider research that we're doing, is kind of feeding into the development and evolution of audience spectrum. So watch this space. If you're not signed up to our newsletter, get on that, because we'll tell you about this stuff as it happens and it comes out. So definitely worth keeping an eye on. Look at that, 4 minutes to go. Our timing was pretty good, I think, there. As I said, we've thrown a lot of information at you there. I really hope it was useful. As I said at the beginning, we will be sending a recording and some notes from this. But really, if you're gonna take 3 things away from today, I would say it would be these 3, just to kind of get started with. It's kind of this idea that segmentation helps us fundamentally group people together by their requirements and then respond to it effectively. Why do we want to do that? Because it helps us all be a bit more efficient and make the most of our resources. And goodness knows we all need to do that, don't we, in the cultural sector. Audience spectrum, it's one of many segmentation tools, but it's ours, and you've come to join us today, so we've talked about ours. Audience spectrum is really powerful, very widely used. Hopefully you've seen today some of the potential for how it could be used and how you've maybe got some ideas churning about how that might be useful for you. Certainly from the case studies, there's some great examples out there of what people are doing. And my final thought would be to start really, really small. It can sometimes feel like, gosh, there are 10 segments here and there are 20 subsegments and there's so much detail in all of these profiles. Oh my goodness, I can't, where to even begin? Don't even try to get to grips with all of them at once. You probably don't need to get to grips with all of them at once. You won't have the full spectrum of audience spectrum in your catchment area or in your region that you're working. You just won't. That's just the nature of it. But you will have 2 or 3 really key segments, 2 or 3 that are, maybe they are your core audience. Maybe you'll find that 60% of your audience are metroculturals. Certainly if you're in London or one of the big urban areas, you're likely to find that. So yes, let's get to know our metroculturals and let's get to know the subsegments within metroculturals as well. But then you might also have an obligation to work with a lower engaged group in your area. So use the map, work out, right, in my bit of London, I've got tons of metroculturals, but I've also got quite a lot of kaleidoscope creativity who aren't engaging with us at the moment. They're not in my audience. Right, I'm going to get to know kaleidoscope creativity. I'm not going to worry about the other 8 segments and 16 subsegments, not relevant, focusing on those 2. And if you ever need a bit of support from us, just kind of identifying who those key segments might be for you and how that aligns with your organizational priorities, your business strategies, all of that, we can absolutely do that for you. We're a bunch of people who are fairly good at looking at this sort of stuff and working through it with you. And it's very much a collaborative thing as well, based on the understanding that you've got about your audiences, but also what we've got in terms of hard data about those audiences and those segments in your area. So we can work together to help you identify those groups. So don't be daunted by it all. Just start with getting to know a couple, 1 or 2, and getting to grips with them. So just to leave you before we all dash off, come and talk to us. We're a nice, friendly bunch. We like having a chat with people. We all work from home these days, so we actually quite like the opportunity to have a chat with people out there in the real world doing things. We're always here to kind of talk through what any of this might mean in your individual context at whatever level you're at. If you're thinking, oh my gosh, that whole business of tagging my database with an audience spectrum type sounds amazing. Talk to me about that. Great. That's a brilliant thing to do. If you're thinking, I've no idea what any of this means, can you just remind me of X, Y, and Z and what an experience seeker is? Great, we can do that as well. That's fine. We can literally take you through at any point and have that conversation with you. We can do those persona workshops for your team. And we really want to know what you're finding, kind of implementing this out in the real world. You've seen some of the case studies there as well. But the more we know about what your real world experiences, what your challenges are, the more we can respond to that and provide things that will help. So talk to us is the message. And on that note, if anyone would like to stick around, certainly I can hang around for 10 minutes or so. Certainly Nancy, I think, can as well. Chris has had to dash off. But if anyone does just want to stay on the call here and have a chat with us in a smaller group setting, you're really, really welcome. We'd love to hear from you. We will send out the slides next week. We will send out a feedback form. I know it's very boring, but if you could fill it in, that would be amazing, because it just really helps us plan for the future and make sure that we're getting things as right as we can. And we do also have a newsletter. Sign up to the newsletter because you'll find out about more stuff like this and what we're doing and when. So look at that, dead on 1 minute past 3. I think that's pretty good, timing wise. Nancy, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just thanks for coming, everybody. It's been great seeing such a range of people here from all over the UK as well. Always good to see. Yeah, hope to speak to some of you soon.